Alive and Well STL is a presentation of the St. Louis Regional Health Commission and Rare Gem Productions to build a healthier St. Louis. Power up with the positive. Learn more at oneraregem.com. That's ONERAREGEM.com. The Regional Health Commission works in partnership with regional health sector advocates and stakeholders to improve healthcare access, reduce health disparities, and improve health outcomes for the uninsured and the underinsured in St. Louis City and County.
Alive and Well, STL. We can better manage the stress in our lives by building supportive relationships and communities. And you can bring Alive and Well STL to your community by becoming an Alive and Well STL ambassador. Ambassadors are a key part of educating our community about how trauma impacts our social, emotional, and health outcomes.
My idealistic hope would be that we can decrease the prevalence of trauma within children's lives.
My hope truly is that people realize, that they may be that person causing trauma and that there's help out there. You do not have to continue the cycle. You do not have to do that same thing over and over again.
There are so many ways to help, and the benefits can be applied in a wide range of areas. This is producer Jade Harrell. We'll be right back. Meet the ambassadors.
It really is about shifting the perspective of how we see our fellow humans. When I interact with somebody who I'm not entirely sure what's going on behind their behavior, to having more compassion as I'm interacting with them. And I think that it's so important that no matter what the profession is that you are in, as long as you're interacting with people, this information is going to be very valuable.
Take 5. Log on to aliveandwellstl.com. Alive and Well STL. Ambassadors are a key part of educating our community about how trauma impacts our social, emotional, and health outcomes. Meet the ambassadors who bring the Alive and Well STL training and education to our classrooms and with our children.
Denise Long, occupational therapist, educational psychologist.
I'm Carrie Jost, occupational therapist.
I am so glad to have you both with me today.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So we are excited to bring another pair of ambassadors to the table to share about their experience, their story, and why being an ambassador for Alive and Well STL makes absolutely perfect sense for anyone who has a passion for community and is looking to make a real difference and change in their environment. So how did you hear about the Alive and Well STL program and the ambassador opportunity?
Actually heard about Alive and Well through Emily Luft, who is a director at Alive and Well. She told me about the program, the Educational Learning Collaborative, actually, that Alive and Well does with school districts. We are involved with an online network, the Asus Community Adverse Childhood Experiences online network. She saw a posting that I had, kind of took a look at what I was doing there with my communication, and she reached out to me, and I was really glad to hear about it. It's an excellent program, and education definitely has a significant role to play in helping our kids heal from trauma.
Mm-hmm. So you were already kind of functioning in this space.
Absolutely.
And so this was kind of a natural progression, a natural connection really for you and the Alive and Well program. Let's talk a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I graduated from Mizzou, in 1997 with my bachelor's in health science. And I graduated in 2015 with my master's in educational psychology with a focus on learning and cognition. The idea being to pair the educational psychology piece with the occupational therapy functional performance paradigm and looking with the educational psychology piece to see how do we change and motivate our clients to be able to take those steps that they need to take to perform better with their occupations, be that the student, the worker, the parent.
What kind of change had you hoped for when you started?
My passion really is psychiatry and psychosocial function. I absolutely love working with kids who have what we call emotional disturbance or psychosocial dysfunction. Those are the kids who have a really difficult time. I call them kids, but they're youth, and that can range right from anywhere from 6 to 24 to 26, and even now they're pushing that up to 30, especially if you've been through trauma, because for a lot of folks who've been through trauma, your development is disrupted and or slowed and or paused, right? Yeah. So you're really recovering so that what we typically think would occur, that learning, that development that would occur in childhood for some folk who've been through trauma is actually occurring in adulthood while they're healing. So that's where my passion lies, and that's what I put my energy and my focus in now.
Absolutely. And so how does Alive and Well STL work with you for that?
You know what? I love the folk at Alive and Well. They're so dynamic, and we do a lot of trainings with educational environments. So with school districts who are trying to incorporate a trauma-informed care principle within the way that they work with kids. So we do trainings as an OT, of course, about sensory integration, about self-regulation, about how to teach kids how to self-manage and be reflective of their behaviors, how those behaviors affect them as individuals, and also how it affects them as, neighbors to their table mates, classroom mates, and in the school environment in general.
Carrie, I hear
that is my job.
Carrie, I hear you're laughing. So yeah. This must be hitting a familiar chord.
Absolutely. I am still, I am a school-based therapist at this time. Okay. I work in the St. Louis Public Schools, and I kind of get around to a lot of schools, and I find myself working with the teachers and the staff a lot. I came upon Alive and Well by accident. Literally, someone had printed out a flyer for the training, and it was on the copier. So that was a Jesus thing. I was like, look at that, God, I hear you. Because I had been feeling a little, we discussed this earlier, a little trapped by being the sloppy handwriting teacher, that they assume that occupational therapy is really just because we do work with fine motor skills. So there's such a lack of education about what we really work towards, that it's not about, if they have sloppy handwriting, do they have the motor skills, the hand function,
the motivation,
and the motivation to do their writing? That's a huge piece too. And then that attention piece. So many kids with ADHD, whether they're or autism on the spectrum, whether they're in self-contained type classroom or the regular classroom, where they struggle with that space, like Denise was talking about. We don't realize how when a teacher's stressed out, and this is where it kind of hits home to my passions, is when a teacher's stressed out and then the kids are now stressed out, especially the sensitive children who are sensitive to sounds and smells and sights and energy.
See, we hadn't considered that.
That goes on a lot. And so, because that transference and that projection and all that psychological part of it is so huge in the school environment.
Yeah.
I did the first session of Alive and Well, and it was kind of a rocky road because, like Denise was talking about, I have been through trauma. And so it's been part of my recovery process. I didn't know a lot of what I was dealing with when I was in OT school. I had some bumps and rocky, moments, and didn't really know what was happening. And then later on, I had some childhood memories that had been repressed surface through chiropractic adjustment. And I was getting triggered with case studies in school, especially. And then some other things going on. Here my dad has a heart attack. And, that wasn't that was so traumatic, but it triggered some other things that brought out other memories and things that I hadn't dealt with. And some things I remembered completely because I was 17 when I was raped, but I never got treatment for that rape. And so because of how family reacted and because I chose the self-medicating route, it took me 9 years to get a bachelor's degree, but I always knew I had this thing in me, that I had to do this. Yeah. And my, OT is the family business. I'm the third one out of 4 sisters. But I didn't realize, I always knew I was a mental health OT. And, getting out into the field, I haven't gotten to do what I feel really called to do, very strongly connected to so many specific types of kids and young people. And so when I found out about Alive and Well, it was like, oh my gosh, this is where I'm supposed to be headed. So now I have like this platform to discuss it, because I've never been ashamed of who I am. But when struggles come up, when you don't know, post-traumatic stress is episodic. They want to label you as bipolar. They want to label you as, borderline personality. There's all these diagnoses that all fits under. But until you finally realize that there is actually a trauma and there's triggering events happening, you don't realize in the moment, and I know because I've always had the gift of insight, I've had counselors say to me, wow, you're going to finish every story you just started, didn't you? Like, it's not really flight of ideas when you remember what all you said and you're going to complete all your stories.
Wow.
But there's a little bit of disorganization going on in your thinking and your processing. And so to finally put it all together and to figure out it's not what's wrong with me, it's what happened to me. So that's why that first half of that training.
Yeah, and that's what really brings it all together with Alive and Well. STL. It's just so powerful how in the work that it gives us to do, that it then shines the light and reflective opportunity on ourselves to become better, whole, more well people ourselves.
Absolutely.
You know. Well, you two have had formal training. You've had the Alive and Well formal training. So you're coming from a place of knowing, but you still sound like you have had some really enlightening, insightful things to come from being an ambassador in the Alive and Well program. For the layman, for folks who may not have had the experiences and the training and the exposure that you have, what can you teach us from the things that you have acquired that we should know as folks that work with young people, but personally as well?
I think this taps into what Carrie was talking about before. We have to really, it's a relief, right, to really accept and understand that trauma is pervasive. It's a relief in that you're not the only one.
Right.
Knowing that you're not the only one is actually really liberating. I think many folks who've experienced private event trauma, like Carrie talks about what she went through and what I've gone through in my own life in terms of private events, what many people have gone through in terms of private event trauma, there's a shame that goes with that actually inhibits your growth and development because you feel like it was your fault and you can't tell anybody about it, so you don't get the relief and the release that you need so that you can heal and finally move on and thrive. So if you can learn anything from Alive and Well, it is knowing that you're not the only one and that there's help and there's space and you can breathe.
And I was just thinking while you're talking, like, the world wants you to take a medication bandage. You know, this pill's going to fix, because they look at the symptoms and it falls in this category. So, of course, you need this pill. And so until you figure out, you really need to talk about it. You really, and it doesn't even have, I mean, I found this healing through my church and through this path that God set me on. And it wasn't, you know, professionals I had to pay. It was truly being brought to my knees and crying and praying and just really finding salvation and peace with everything. And then it's also realizing in your everyday life that when people are exploding at other people, or if you see someone just angry, like that hot-headedness, that very often we think, gosh, what's wrong with that person? Right. We forget that they might be going through something at that time. And so sometimes to just step out of yourself and to truly seeing the world through the lens of trauma, that theme with Alive and Well, which I so got out of my training through Alive and Well. And even the very first, that portion that non-clinical people go to, you get that piece out of that initial training to really step back and to not judge them so much for what's happening in that moment, but, you know, consider there could be something going on. It may not be current. It could be, you know, it could be many years past. Because like I said, my trauma was 30 years suppressed, you know, and I was 17 when, you know, the other really big trauma happened. But you're looking at a 35-year-old woman who's struggling as a new professional, you know, and it's not my personality to scream and yell at people or to cuss the random phone person out, you know, like the poor Sprint people or the, you know, like we know how we get when, you know, we're upset about money and they messed up your bill. Like then when it's out of the norm of someone's personality, that's when you really need to say what's going on there.
And imagine where that leaves us if we don't know a person.
Absolutely.
We run into, we happen to intersect the person at that place without any knowledge of that or what their personality is or if that's really how they are. And then our response in that moment could be a very critical piece in what's happening along the way for them.
That's true.
Yes, absolutely.
And who knows how that can escalate. And as ambassadors, you and you've referred to the first part of the training, the second part. I'm hearing that you got some pretty helpful and insightful training through Alive and Well STL to make you better suited or more apt to respond to things like that, even with your formal training.
Well, absolutely. One of the great validations and benefits of Alive and Well that makes the program really evidence-based is that it is grounded in what we call adversity science, or the Asus science, an understanding of how adversity and trauma actually changes your brain, how it changes the way that you perceive the world and how you think.
Wow.
So one of the things that they taught us in Alive and Well about, neurobiology is that when one experiences trauma early in life, or at any particular time, but especially early in life when you're figuring out kind of how the world works, and what your space and place is in it, whether the world is a safe place or not. When you experience trauma early in life, you start to develop the more primitive parts of your brain, right? Your lizard brain, your survival brain. So the stimuli that you experience, people, situations, inanimate objects, if you will, you filter all of those repeatedly through that lizard survival part of your brain, and it's continually reinforced. Whereas for someone who perhaps hasn't experienced as much trauma and adversity, or that trauma and adversity happens later in life, when that survival part of the brain when the more cognitive part of the brain has already been developed, they can think through those things and react and respond right to a stimulus versus reacting. A lot of folks who've experienced trauma later in life, when we talk about those explosions that happen, those stimuli, it's a reaction. Those stimuli are actually noxious. They're actually painful. They're actually threatening to a person who's experienced trauma early in life or has experienced repeated trauma. Makes one very sensitive.
And what's funny is, despite all the formal training, having a minor in psych to go into OT and all of those, that being, a passion of ours, but the Alive and Well sort of pointed out that piece of toxic stress. So realizing that when there's a lot going on in someone's life, they may be acting a little, we see people who they don't normally snap, but they're like, they have so many things going on and they snapped at this person, snapped at that person, or the shutdown. I do actually experience this a lot in the school system. So many kids who just won't work. I hear teachers who are screamers, and then I see students who shut down and won't do anything. And I think some of the teachers are under the impression they only respond if you scream at them. But I've seen really great educators get more out of whispering and not saying anything than the screaming. And when you're looking at a classroom and you're looking at 30 people in a room, so say it's a classroom of 30 children, and we look at the numbers of the prevalence of trauma. I don't know the exact number, but when you're looking at, some may have had one or two, some have none, some have had many, no matter what grade you're even looking at anymore. And we can be a preschool environment. And where I work in the St. Louis City, they experience a lot more on a regular basis. And so they're all at different levels, and you're looking at that group and you have the teacher who's screaming. You don't know the child that's shutting down, whether that child has an issue or if they're shutting down because of how they're being approached. So there's kind of all of this going on. So maybe that child's could be poking someone behind them, and that could be setting a little guy off, and then they're getting, in trouble in the office, and they think it's him. Like, there's such little things that you don't notice when you think about the sensory systems, sights, sounds, touches, and teachers touching a hoodie. I mean, or taking someone's hood off their head, take your coat off. So I became more aware of looking at the total picture of what's going on, and spending a year as an evaluator. So many of the children that we evaluated that didn't need special education services, I just noticed truly it was trauma. They were kiddos, because it looks like ADHD. It looks it can look
ODD.
Like autism. It definitely looks like oppositional defiant disorder, the emotional behavioral disorders.
Some of the most amazing acronyms. I'm like, oh wow.
Well, what's funny is I have a sermon that I call alphabet soup. There you go. And it's all of my letters.
It's pretty awesome though, because it helps us to create some kind of parameter or definition or some kind of tool to reference. Because who knows what to do? And so you come to this understanding and awareness. And what does being an Alive and Well STL ambassador do to equip you once you know? What's the response versus the reaction?
I get to I give teachers referrals to Alive and Well trainings, because then if I know that Patsy's going to get them, or Emily and Sean are going to do that thing that made all of my light bulbs, shine brighter because I knew all of that, it kind of can send them on the path of becoming an ambassador as well.
Right. What does that mean for you?
So there are multiple ways to look at that when you're talking about that capacity and that response versus the reaction. As a provider, be that an educational provider, a teacher, as a therapist, as a parent, right?
Yes.
You're a care provider, regardless of what that looks like. It is really infusing your persona and your interaction with the person to whom you're providing care with compassion.
Yes. Using my persona with compassion, with who I'm working with. I really like that. I wanted to just have a moment in that. Infuse my persona, who I am, the real, sincere, caring part of me, with compassion to the person I'm providing care for.
Absolutely.
When I think about, Carrie says, the yelling teachers, I'm this morning, everybody in my house was yelling, just yelling. I mean, we were all yelling. The children were yelling at each other.
It happens.
Yes, it happens in my house too. That's for sure.
But then I'm thinking, well, how is care going to be administered through all of that? Yeah. And everyone, I think, left the house, the cars, in some state of
Yep.
And I really value that because you have to pause to do that.
Yep.
You have to pause to do that. And here's the other thing. We're people. We're fallible. We're not perfect. So with that infusion of compassion is also what you extend to yourself.
Come on.
So I'm not expecting perfection, but what we do when we have those moments where maybe we spoke a little too roughly is I call you if you're at school, or I text my daughter if you're at school, say, hey, I'm really sorry this morning. I was being really impatient. I'm really sorry about that. Can you forgive me? Love you very much. You repair. So there's compassion and repair.
Response, compassionate response, and
relational repair.
Look at you. Can I take your class?
Yes.
Alive and well. Thank you very much.
That's right. Well, I had the pleasure of training in Jennings this summer with Emily, and at the question portion, one of the teachers was like, well, how do you know when they haven't done this and they keep not turning their homework in on time and this and that? And I said, you know what I would do? And I literally sat down in my chair. I would sit down in my chair right in front of them and say, hey, we need to talk about this. Sometimes it's really like, picking your battles and like really being human. Like you do not have to be the performer and they're watching you all the time. They want to see you say, hey, I'm sorry I was yelling yesterday. I was in a bad mood. Let's watch a movie and do a worksheet today. To really step back and be honest and acknowledge your downfalls helps children and young people be more accepting of themselves.
Absolutely.
Like it's such a full circle thing.
I love that. Well, let me ask both of you for an invitation, to extend an invitation to those that are listening to become ambassadors and be a part of this movement.
Well, I would say if there is anything about the idea of living with compassion, using yourself therapeutically without being a therapist to heal, to provide hope to the people in your community, in your organization, in your family, in your church, whatever that may be, then Alive and Well is for you. It's about
really for everybody.
It is for everybody.
Absolutely. I wrote this book called Leader Without a Title, and you can, and no matter what your role is. I mean, if the maintenance guy has this training and he sees a child that's upset that day, he's going to say, "Hey, what's going on?" And the research has proven, and one of the big Alive and Well points is it just takes one caring adult to make a difference for a child who's gone through trauma. So you can make that choice to be that adult, with any role you have in your life, and there's no area of living life that trauma doesn't impact.
Right.
And so Alive and Well gives you that platform.
But look at what we do to the level of trauma by being those people, by being in those spaces. We just lowered it, reduced it.
It's true.
One with the awareness, but also with somewhat of the antidote. Which is a wonderful thing. What is your hope, Denise?
Oh, goodness. Now you're going to get me on my soapbox.
I got to get. They picked me for a reason. I am an ambassador of sorts.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, my hope, honestly, I'm going to give you my idealistic and then my practical hope.
I like that. I want both.
My idealistic hope would be that we can decrease the prevalence of trauma within children's lives, right? My practical relates to that in that we can get families, teachers, care providers to actually understand what Carrie just said. It only takes one to come and get the training, whether you become an Alive and Well ambassador or if you just get the training to understand what trauma is, how it affects the development of the people you interact with, to come and get that training so that you can be that safe, nurturing relationship and create those safe, nurturing environments that are the antidote to trauma.
Absolutely.
So I do want to know what creates the need for the distinction between your ideal and your practical, because I love them both.
Trauma happens. It happens often. And here's the thing about it. Trauma, right, is defined as an event and or experience, right? Both, really. The event and the experience of the event that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. So it's very individualized. What may be nothing big for Carrie may be very traumatizing for me. My parents get divorced. My dad loses his job. I mean, all of these types of things that are just really parts of life. Trauma happens. So on an idealistic perspective, I know that stuff is going to happen to folks, right? It doesn't necessarily have to become trauma.
Right.
It can be an adversity. And if we have practically those folks out there who can be that safe space, that compassionate being, who those kids who've experienced those adversities that I mentioned go through, we can decrease trauma. Mm-hmm. So they connect very directly, I think.
Yeah, I think so
Absolutely.
too. I think so too. And I want them both.
Yeah, and I think for me, my hope truly is that people realize, that they may be that person causing trauma and that there's help out there. Ooh. That they figure out that it's okay that they're having a struggle, and we understand we all have struggle. Mm-hmm. You can get help. Alive and Well is going to connect you with someone who's going to help you. You don't have to be ashamed. We all make mistakes, like you said. We are human. Mm-hmm. And you do not have to perpetuate you do not have to continue the cycle. You do not have to do that same thing over and over again. You can make a choice, like, the light bulb can be, I don't want to be like this. So as providers, it's been really great, to share that with other teachers. I love Alive and Well's ability for me to have someone to send them, or some place for them to go, because I want to fix everybody and do everything. Mm-hmm. But, it does take an army. And now it's like this Alive and Well army that's infiltrating this region. Right, and it's a beautiful thing.
Awesome image.
And it's around the country. The trauma-informed movement is huge. And so getting it going in Missouri and really, having the opportunity even on the state level to get involved in, the sensory and somatic work groups that's for us professionally to get involved to help people to create toolkits for people to understand. So the news broadcasts have been great that Alive and Well does, because of the fact that it's helping someone know you're not alone, because you don't go talking, you don't sit around at church on Sunday and go, hey, I screamed at my kid yesterday and I almost hit him. And I did, that's just not how we talk. Mm-hmm. And because most people are ashamed of their own selves when they're behaving badly, because they do know it's not okay. Mm-hmm. And and so forgiving yourself and being forgiving of yourself, and then learning to forgive those that have hurt you, and really step back and know, because it was a big thing for me when I had the memories come back. I forgave the person who I remembered hurting me, because he had already suffered and died for his sins tragically. Mm-hmm. And so forgiveness kind of came with it, but then I also had to go through all the stages of grief. Mm-hmm. It's not a staircase like, oop, here's this, and you go, right. It's a circle, and it kind of wraps around like a ball of yarn.
Yeah,
recovery,
Yeah. But to know that it's there, and that it's attainable, and it is available for us, is where that hope is. So what's your invitation as we close out?
Just for people to just to get involved with Alive and Well in some way, whatever way works for you. Tell someone else about it. Just get on the website and read through what's happening out there. Google trauma-informed care. Google trauma, or just be busy. HOPE to me is the acronym Healthy Occupation and Purposeful Engagement. That's what HOPE is for me.
I love it.
St. Louis HOPE is this thing I'm working on in my notebooks, because it is for us as OTs. It's about doing something. If cooking's your thing, if you're angry at someone, go bake something. If sewing's your thing, get up and make sure. Whatever you need to do, even if it's walking, just find your thing. Do something to make yourself feel better, and stop that in your own. So my invitation is just to find what makes you happy and do that more.
Absolutely. And the Alive and Well STL Ambassadors Program is a great opportunity for that. But aliveandwellstl.com is a great source to find information and understand just what options are available to you. Thank you, Denise and Carrie, for sharing
Thank you.
with us not only your story, but for sharing your life and heart and work to make a difference. Vontrice McDowell is in the studio, and she is going to tell us where we can find out more about Alive and Well STL and what they have upcoming.
Hello, my name is Vontrice McDowell. I'm a Director of Community-Based Interventions with Alive and Well STL. And for more information about our upcoming events, as well as the Ambassador Program, please check us out at aliveandwellstl.com.
If you're interested in being a part of Alive and Well STL and helping continue the conversation, please visit aliveandwellstl.com or email aliveandwellstl@stlrhc.org. We're excited to have you join us with the Alive and Well STL movement. Alive and Well STL is now a community-wide effort focused on reducing the impact of stress and trauma on our health and well-being. The research is clear. Stress and traumatic experiences are making many of us sick, and together are the leading cause of poor health outcomes. Take 5. Visit us at aliveandwellstl.com to find out where you are emotionally. Become an ambassador. Reach out and help build a supportive community. Learn resiliency skills. Get the help you need. Share your stories. Hear others. And learn more about stress and how it affects us. That's aliveandwellstl.com. Alive and Well STL is another positive production of Rare Gem Productions. Thanks.